processor-based unit. It's an analog type thing. The trip unit is a microprocessor-based unit, trip logic unit, as well as the bistable trip unit. And both of those are discussed in the DCD that says when you have a watchdog timer timeout, that it resets the microprocessor, which is fine. But at the same time, it also results in the channel being put in a trip condition. That's all translates. The one part that Butler talked about that is if the trip logic unit output ceases going to the output logic unit, the output logic unit was supposed to be placed in a trip condition also. There's no discussion of, I went through all the revisions and could not find any discussion of that anywhere. So we must have missed it or what have you. I have no idea how that's going to happen in any of these designs. So that's the one loose end that's still hanging out, which you probably can't answer because there's nothing. And I've keyworded that all the way through all three sets: Rev 7, Rev 9, Rev 10. And the only time output logic units are referenced is in relative to the bypass switches operating and the positions of the bypass switches. So that's one loose end. The other one was we had extensive discussions on that giant redundant network where all the information goes, from the plant systems up to the main control room and then out to other entities. And it's the old control of access. And there's this little box called a firewall, redundant firewall. It's the only mention in the entire DCD of the firewall. It doesn't give any description of what it is, although when we talked about it verbally, it was supposed to be, based on our discussions, a hardware-based firewall. Mm-hmm. However, when you go through the DCD, there's absolutely no mention, there's no paragraph, there's nothing in it, and in your FCR, there is absolutely no words relative to firewalls either. And I looked at your whatever one we were supposed to be looking at, I think based on where you called out Rev 9 or something like that. Well, actually, I looked at it, it said Rev 9 up in the beginning. I'll stick with John over here based on what I read. And if it's Rev 10, that's fine. I'm not going to argue with you back and forth on that.
Rev 10 is a certified rev, right?
Well, if I go back.
Be careful.
DTD Tier 2 Rev 9 table such and such identifies, and that's mentioned all the way through. This is your old FSER.
Be careful because there's a bunch of 9s and 10s floating around.
That's right.
DCD Rev 10 is the operative revision.
Right. That's right.
FSAR, COLA FSAR Rev 9 is the operative version of their...
Got that. And I'm looking at their SER.
And their SER doesn't have a revision on it.
It says DCD Tier 2 Rev 9 tab. I'm reading the paragraphs right in the FSER.
Right. So all the INC issues...
They look the same.
...were resolved by Rev 9. Rev 10 didn't have any INC.
That's fine. I'm not going to... You can worry about consistency. You can work on that however you want to. My only point being is that where was it? The firewall issue is not even discussed in your old SER.
See, I think, but if I remember it correctly, I mean, it's been a few years, Mr. Brown, 6, 7 years.
I had a hard time. I'm back in paper.
GE had a separate topical report on cybersecurity.
Yeah, I never got that.
Okay, in that report, they chose to put that information in the cybersecurity topical report.
I did go and look at the cybersecurity
if I recall it correctly. So it was not part of the, so they kept that. You remember that discussion about malicious versus non-malicious, and we needed to keep the two segregated in such a way. And eventually, I believe what had happened was that the cybersecurity issues were handled under Part 73.
So I remember all that discussion. The problem with Part 73 was it's so general, it just says things are programmatic fundamentally, and if you don't have an architecture that allows you to do anything, then you're screwed.
So now, if you look at their DCD, throughout the DCD, they talk about being conscious of cybersecurity requirements as they develop the software, as they lay out the hardware. So if you look at the Appendix B, which is the software lifecycle development process, so in those steps, continuously, GEH commits to assuring that the cybersecurity features are taken into consideration as they're developing the system. So we have the DAX and the ITACs, which would verify that these things
I went through the ITACs and couldn't find anything.
Well, those are part of the lifecycle development phases. Each lifecycle development phase.
Not in the DCD.
They are in Tier 1 as part of the...
I just watchdog firewalls and ITACs.
They may not be
watchdogs, and it's not in there anywhere.
They may not be specific to watchdog or this. They are specific to the lifecycle phases. So when we look at the lifecycle phase where they need to address these commitments, so they are part of those, whether they're the requirement phase or whether it's the design phase of the lifecycle, whether it's the integration phase of the hardware software. That's where GEH wants to assure, and I think in their discussion, looking at, where they had discussed the simplicity of the design, they talked about that the cybersecurity needed to be accounted for early in design, and it's not an afterthought. At the same time, they kept the two separate, where cybersecurity did fall into our requirements, which are under Part 73, and they kept the design. So under the IEEE standard, 7432, and the reg guide that's associated with that, that's where we talk about secure development environment.
Yeah, that's all clear, but if you don't...
And that's where they were, they were separating. We basically were told at that time that, you in the DCD could not address Part 73 issues. Okay, because those are programmatic issues.
Yeah, then it's tough.
Yeah.
I understand that.
Right.
Okay? So the point being that if you don't have an architecture that supports something, then you come in 6-7 years later and you can't do anything.
Right.
You have to modify the plant. So you can have all the programmatic words you want to when you come down 5 or 6 years later. And the point being that the design stage, we're still arguing about that.
So there's only one interface point which connects to the outside world.
And that's the firewall.
That is the firewall, right? And then you have one-way communication at different levels. From the safety network to the plant control system network, it's a one-way communication. And then from there to the plant computer system, it's a one-way communication on the plant computer network.
That's not very clear when you read it.
And then from there out to the outer world, it's a one-way communication. To the tech support center, EOF,
that comes out of the firewall.
It comes out of the firewall. That's what I'm talking about, but that's a one-way communication.
Software-based or hardware-based?
That software hardware base is really discussed, as part of the cybersecurity plan as to how that is done. It's not really part of this design requirement. We did not have that requirement.
I know you didn't.
Yeah, right.
But now we're 6 years later when we're smarter, and we ended up with absolutely zero discussion of the interfaces to the outside world in your old SER. And I was just somewhat surprised after we've gone through a number of other designs. I mean, ESBWR is probably one of the worst looking designs overall architecture-wise. It's complex, it's difficult to understand, and there's very few detailed requirements compared to what we established established in later DCDs for the other design
At
centers.
the same time, I would say that ESPWR's INC architecture was such where you did not have any non-safety to safety communication issues. They were totally segregated. We did not have that in there.
I'm not talking about non-safety. I'm talking about outputs up into the network and how that's addressed and how this final determination on these late licensees like this are actually considered and thought about as part of the SER. That's all. So your discussion about...
So what I'm going to say is, while we were doing the North NRCOL, their application came in, they said incorporated by reference ESPWR design certification. So we really did not even spend the time looking at we assumed that, okay, that's certified, there's a finality to it, and it's referenced by, incorporated by reference in the North NR3, Chapter 7, the INC design. And really, there was nothing for us to review.
But even so, what you're telling me, Dinesh, is that fundamentally there were holes what was originally certified.
Well, I wouldn't say that there were.
There are. When there's no definition of what some of these critical interfaces are.
Well, what I'm saying,
that's a hole. And they're defined in some of the later design centers.
Yeah, but when we look at the process that's laid out in the DCD, which basically talks about at various stages to assure that the cybersecurity features are incorporated in the design menu from the early stages. And since we have the DACs and ITACs, which would be used, just like what we're doing with AP 1000 right now, we are reviewing these things as they are being built. So there is no hole. I don't see a hole. I don't think there's a mess.
I've just finished while we were doing this stuff, I was just going through the ITACs on the entire reactor protection system as well as the safeguard system. And fundamentally, you do nothing but check functionality. If I turn a switch, the plant trips. If I introduce a high power thing, well, it trips. It's functionality based. If I flip a bypass switch, I bypass. So it's totally functionality.
No, there's a set of ITACs and DACs that were there on the life cycle processes also.
Yeah, no, but they don't.
That's where it's covered. All of these things are covered under that.
Okay, I guess we can disperse with this, and I'll figure out what I want to recommend that we write in our letter.
We can take it outside of the North Anna discussion because that was certified. So for North Anna's purposes, it was IBR. So I'm
not arguing with North Anna. I understand.
So if you want to discuss further on how the ESPWR is going, hopefully they'll build the plan sooner so we can get involved in that thing, All
right. I don't want to. Okay. I just wanted to get it on the record that there's, in my opinion, there's a number of loose ends, and that I think we need to somehow start grappling with sooner or later. We did that on the later ones. I know we're dealing with ITACs and stuff like that on AP 1000, but we also had a far more detailed definition of how watchdog timers would do certain things, and that they were hardware, and that there was a one-way hardware-based output to the external world, such there was no chance for the superhighway to be opened up to anybody. If you talk about the safety systems going into the network, those are software-based, and you don't differentiate. You talk about one way, but you don't say they have to be such and such. Many of them are two-way, because you got to get some information from the control room back in to these systems, or particularly the control and other type things that you do deal with. So I'm just saying there are places where you have to have bidirectional, and you depend on your software process. There's other ones where you don't, and yet they're not covered. They're not specifically stated to be one-way hardware and not to be compromised, so they can't be compromised. And that's my biggest concern. I'm just worried about that area, and it's not part of the programmatic part. I understand all that. If you don't have an architecture and a physical design that accomplishes those end results, you can't do anything with it once the system's designed and built. That's all. So I just wanted to get that on the record since this was my opportunity.
All right. If there is further discussion, if you'd like to have, we can take it outside.
We did this 6 years ago.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I guess we have one more presentation on the fire and open phase event.
Yes. I'm Bob Fitzpatrick from the Electrical Engineering Branch in NRR. This is my 6th presentation to the ACRS on passive design, so hopefully we can go through it quickly. But the Byron event occurred back in January of 2012. It wasn't immediately detected. It took the operators about 8 minutes to detect it, to determine what was going on. They had a faulty source, and we were able to separate from it. As part of that, both off-site and on-site electrical power systems were rendered unable to perform their intended safety function if called upon. So this presented a potential common cause failure event, and therefore the staff needed to address this and see what was happening across the entire fleet. The staff took 4 separate actions. First, a special inspection at Byron. Then we put out an information notice to all the stakeholders on what we found. Then we launched a bulletin, which was really a questionnaire of how would your plant recognize this event, how would it react to it, and all that. And it turns out one plant in the country said their plant would have actually detected it as it progressed at Byron. Everyone else said they wouldn't have. So we collected all that data, put together a summary report, analyzed the data, and in that summary report, we came up with recommended actions for the designs. And now I'm going to talk about those for the passive design. For the passive plants, our recommendation was that there be detection of single or double loss of phase events with or without a high impedance fault, and across all operating modes of the plant. So that's a high load level or a low load level, basically what that means. Detection should be on the high voltage side of the transformers that feed off-site power into the plant's electrical distribution system. There should be a dedicated alarm in the control room, and provide plant personnel, operations, and maintenance with training procedures in how to handle all of this. Next slide. This design solution was taken on by the ESPWR, and in their Rev 10, they formalized a design approach, which we accepted as part of that review, and included the following. They identified existing relays within their distributed control and instrumentation system that can detect loss of phase events with and without high impedance faults. These relays are located on the high voltage side of the unit auxiliary transformers and the reserve auxiliary transformers. The design utilizes these programmable relays to monitor both current and potential transformer outputs per phase on each of 3 phases. The DCD includes inspection tests, analysis, and acceptance criteria, ITAC, to demonstrate that the proper set points have been developed and that testing demonstrates full functionality. And the DC also includes interface requirements for the combined operating license applications to establish training procedures for the staff to meet the staff's position. So here we have North Anna. The North Anna design is incorporated by reference. So they have the design solution simply by referencing the DCD, which includes the design, the detection, the alarm in the control room, and the ITAC. And then they also committed in Rev 8 of the COLA, this is where this appeared, the plant operating procedures, including normal operating procedures associated with the monitoring system, will be developed in accordance with FSCR subsection 13 and at least 6 months prior to fuel load. Maintenance and testing procedures, including calibration, set point determination, and troubleshooting procedures associated with the monitoring system will be developed in accordance with the FSAR, again, another section of section 13, prior to fuel loading. And control room operator and maintenance technician training associated with the operation and maintenance of the monitoring system would be developed in accordance with FSAR section, again, 13, for reactor operators and for non-licensed plant staff, another section of section 13, chapter 13 of the FSAR. So in summary, they've met all our requirements, and we find it acceptable.
Bob, in the DCD, and I understand understand DCD and I understand COL. But in the DCD, all they do is they refer to existing solid state relaying for those transformers, which implies no change from whatever they had.
Right. The claim was that they had...
The claim was that they had sensitive enough, and they were
programmable.
They would program the stuff so that they could detect it.
And add algorithms.
It can be pretty sinister, as you know.
Right.
What'd you say? They're sinister?
Sinister. To detect an open phase condition, depending on what it is, you have to sometimes be pretty creative in terms of what you're monitoring.
Right.
And the differences of what you're monitoring. So, did the staff? Well, I guess ultimately they need to meet. There's NEI guidance out there. There's industry guidance on what the industry needs to do. And I assume when you finally look at the as-built stuff,
They have years to actually develop it.
Yeah. I mean,
we did not review a design.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I just had one question. Did you finish, John?
I am.
I just had one question. The programmable relays, are those various versions of programmable relays? Some can be hooked into networks where you have remote access to perform the programming if they're software-based algorithms. Mm-hmm. Is this the type of relays we're talking about, where they then become susceptible to external hacking?
That question never came up in the review. We don't know. They might know by now, but this was a commitment to get this done.
So there was no, so that's just referred to as programmable relays.
It is not. I will read it from the DCD section 8.2.1.2.2 of revision 10 of the ESBWR design control document. It says we got all that stuff on the record. Monitoring the normal and alternate preferred power supply feeds through the UAT and RAT is done by the digital protective relays used for transformer protection, specifically the potential and current transformers on the high voltage side of the UAT and RAT transformers used by the digital protective relays are also used to detect open phase conditions with or without an accompanying ground fault. There's other stuff that says it alarms in the control room and operators can take.
Well, yeah, you can send information out.
It didn't say programmable, it said digital.
Digital does not necessarily mean programmable.
Someplace there is something monitoring the outputs of those relays that has to do some sort of comparative evaluation. But,
And you can have a digital relay where you literally go and physically adjust it, not with software. So I'm not picking on it one way or the other. I just was curious.
that's just for the reference, because exactly what it says.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you for that. But I've read a number of. There's been just all you got to do is go to the internet and you can find out all kinds of places where switchyard type components that are now being controlled in some cases, for large term grid distribution control via internet and signals coming in, and there are some interesting things that happen in incidents. So anyway, all right, I would just want, so it's kind of vague, and that's digital is digital.
Right. The proof of the pudding will be,
that's right.
The ITAC.
Well, the ITAC just says we have something that gets tested. That doesn't mean it's software controlled or combinational logic type digital. Okay, I'm done. Thank you.
Okay. So, Jim, do you have some concluding remarks?
Yeah. Yes. We did want to, and I think during today's meeting, we did pretty much go through all these public questions that we had from last meeting. So just to summarize, we had the issue of the footprint change, and I think the question was a little bit off because it sounded like the person thought that the entire site was moved several miles away, but in reality, reality, it was just a change of the, within the ESP. So we addressed that in our Chapter 2 review and showing it was really moved because of a flooding issue of the Site 1 and 2. The other one was the ancient fault. Now, we've had these questions several times since the North Anna review, and I think Alice addressed that with the million-year fault, and there was the concern about when the Unit 1 and Unit 2 were being constructed. Back in the 70s, there was an issue related to that, and it's been well documented, and anyway, the person could review those documents based on that review from North Anna, when North Anna 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 were under construction. The other one was the stakeholder. Actually, I think it was John Stetcar answered that question today about the Fermi being is really being bounded by the DCD is why the Central Eastern United States SSC curve. The question was, why didn't Fermi use that curve? And I think one of the members actually answered it, and that is that it is bounded by the DCD for Fermi, so they didn't, right. Somebody answered it. And that's all we had as far as those, some public comments. We just wanted to get back and be responsive to the public. The only other thing is, if you want me to go down, I wrote down the list of like questions. Now, I think Dominion answered them, and maybe Gina and I can coordinate and figure out what the questions are, or are they still questions? I can start right off at the hydrogen tank. That was question number 1, I understand. Did we answer that? Did Dominion answer the hydrogen tank?
Yeah, this is Gina Borsch. We gave Mike Corradini the safe distances, and he said it was closed.
Yeah. Okay, so that one's closed. Now, the piping temperature range for the fiberglass, we addressed that. The ETE follow-up, we're satisfied with the responses that we had for that.
I think so. I'm going to send that to Mike and make sure he's...
Now, there was the site-specific fire hazard analysis. Did anybody come back on that? And
Not to my knowledge.
So that was the response where I explained that Reg Guide 1.206.
Okay, yes,
We were
yes,
following
you
that
did.
guide.
We do have a response.
okay, should we say it's closed, or we're still trying to look at that?
No, I mean, I understand what they're doing. They're doing what's allowed by something.
Okay.
And we have, a record from the subcommittee meeting.
There's also the question on the Reg Guide. I think the Reg Guide 1.221, I think Ryan answered that, or Nolan, right?
Ryan Nolan.
Ryan Nolan answered that.
I'm okay on that. I mean, that was a more generic question, and I get it. I understand it.
Now, there's the issue of the station auxiliaries, Unit 1 and 2. Maybe I don't have this quite right.
That was, say no more, that was answered this afternoon.
Okay. Good. The other one was, again, on the same subject, was the idea of the site-specific PRA evaluation in regards to the different configuration of the switchyard.
Same thing, right?
Yeah, I mean, finally, we have something on the record about how they're going to address it. How there are opinions, but ultimately it will come down to they'll finally model it. They have to finally model the actual configuration before fuel load.
I actually did pose a question at lunch to our staff, our PRA folks that we didn't have here, and maybe we'll have an answer from them on this particular subject, and if we do, I'll make sure I get it to Gurja.
Yeah, okay.
Right? So just as another data point for you, see what our staff says. There's also the first circuit breaker issue. Was that resolved?
That was not.
No, I haven't.
Okay. It would be. Bob said he needs to go back and take a look at that, and in my mind, it has nothing to do in the sense of a concern, a technical concern that could affect safety. It just has to do with consistency in what the staff looks at within the envelope of the interface equipment that's under the maintenance and testing and surveillance requirements of, in this case, North Annie Unit 3 versus Dominion Transmission System Department.
And
It's more of a regulatory type question.
the only other one I had was the SMA, the 1.67 times, and the issue about why are we doing that, or why are we doing that along with the seismic PRA?
Oh, no, for clarification, I noticed in Chapter 19, I think it's Chapter 19, I could be mistaken, but it must be Chapter 19.
Yeah, Chapter 19.
And on one of the slides today, it said that prior to fuel load, there will be a confirmation that the as-built HCLPF, HICLIF capacities there will be a comparison made between that as-built capacity and the HICLIF capacities that are currently being used today in the PRA margins analysis. There is not a seismic PRA, it's a PRA margins analysis. And it just says that there will be a comparison made, and any vulnerability, additional vulnerabilities or something, I don't remember what the words are, but it's something like, if there's a difference, then the vulnerabilities have to be evaluated. And in the point that I was making was there is a requirement that before fuel load, the COL holder at that time must develop what I'll call a real seismic risk assessment, meaning they have full fragility curves, they have full hazard curves, they convolute them, they run them through a full model for the plant. At that point, once they do that, these HICLIF capacities for the purposes of a seismic margin analysis become meaningless. They're essentially irrelevant from that point forward. So the question I had to the applicant was, well, why are why in the FSAR does it say you're going to do that comparison, and what's the whole purpose of it?
We did get to look at that, and it's in response to a COL item that's in the DCG.
There is a COL item, I found it.
Yes.
I was hoping you were going to say that earlier, but there's a COL item that essentially includes those precise words, and in the FSAR, those words are just parroted back saying, yeah, we're going to do that.
And guess what? It comes from ISG 20, where in section 524 of the ISG, it says the post-COL activities, David found this, include verifications of the plant and sequence level HICLIF capacity by the COL holder based on the as-designed as-built configuration, and it goes on. So
I understand where it comes from, and I'm not... It's on the record.
And, yeah, I just wanted to get it on the record.
It's not it's not at all clear to me why they're doing that, or what the implications would be if there is a difference, given the fact they have to do a real PRA.
Well, I could take that one back, and we can talk to our PRA guys also.
It's not a particularly big concern.
Okay. But we'll still try to...
They're happy doing extra work, and the staff is happy reviewing extra work. That's fine.
No,
I'm always happy to do extra work for you guys.
I appreciate you bringing that up, and we will take a look at it and see what the origin of it is and what we may or may not be able to do about it.
This again...